everyone on the computer speaker. Okay. So the rabbi unfortunately couldn't make it, but I'm so glad all of you are on. And this week's Torah portion is actually one of the most fascinating ones because it's really the end of an era for the Jewish people and the start of a very unfortunate time, but eventually leads to more happy time. And actually, when we look at this week's Torah portion, we could see a lot of similarities between what happened back in the day and to what happens in our times. And throughout Jewish history, we see this thing reoccurring itself over and over and over again of the Jewish people in despair and how they didn't prepare before and how they were redeemed. Now, for those who are following along in the Art Scroll Chumash, it's Parshat Vayechi, it's page 268. But most of the class is going to be outside. Maybe one or two verses, I'll actually read it inside. Now, when we think about it, let's go back to 1930, right? Let's go back to the year 1930. How many Jews were looking at and assessing the situation that was going on in Europe and saying, oh, we have to prepare ourselves, we have to move on, we have to do something? A lot of Jews were just in disbelief what was going on. And with every single situation we see the Jewish people found themselves in, there's this reoccurring story. The Jews slowly see how the situation is deteriorating and things are getting worse, but the Jews aren't doing anything about it. The Jews aren't changing. And there was actually one person who we see in this week's Torah portion who actually wanted to do something about the situation before the Jews go into exile. And this we're going to see in our week's Torah portion. And it's actually fascinating the amount of lessons we can learn and how to look at the future. Just a really short story, something I heard yesterday from a rabbi in Israel. It was in the 1920s and the stock market crashed and everyone lost a lot of money. And there were two stockbrokers who were good friends, but one of them had many, many clients, and one of them was more of an amateur broker. And the one with many clients before the market crash was telling everyone, don't worry, you buy, now is a good time to buy, put your money, invest, sell your houses, put your money in the stock market. And what happened to all of their money? They lost 90%. The market crashed 90%. His friend was a bit of an amateur, but he looked at the market. He was like, things don't align for him. He was like, I think it's a good time to sell. I don't think you should put too much money in. And by the end, his friend ended up being a billionaire after the crash. I don't know, billionaire, and maybe in today's money, he ended up making millions of dollars after the crash because he didn't have that much money in the market. And while his friend went broke. And this happened to many, many, many people. Many people listened to what everyone was saying, go buy, 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 buy. And no one was foreseeing the future, what happened when there's this bubble and it crashes, that it loses 90% of its value and most people were left with nothing. And obviously, there's so many stories about what happened in those times that we don't need to get into it. But why couldn't the professionals see the future? And in this week's Torah portion, we have the same thing. God tells Jacob in last week's Torah portion, don't worry, go down to Egypt. This is where you're meant to be. This is where you're supposed to bring the Jewish people to, and I'm going to be with you in Egypt. And Joseph's the king, and there's nothing for you to worry about. But Jacob comes down to Egypt, and Jacob starts thinking, wait a second, the Jewish people are supposed to be in exile. The Jewish people are supposed to be enslaved. What can I do to help the Jewish people? So we're going to get to that soon, but we're going to start with another story, how this week's Torah portion starts. Yosef is called into his father, and after he's told that his father is really unwell, and his father asks him to come to his bed, and his father asks him to swear, please don't bury me in the land of Egypt. Now, we can all ask a very simple question. Why couldn't Jacob ask Joseph, give me my word, give me your word, you're not burying me in Egypt. You're going to bury me in Israel, right? Yeah, you're going to bury me in Israel? Okay, great, thank you so much. He's like, no, I want you to swear. Joseph was his son. Joseph was supporting him for 17 years. Joseph supported the Jewish people in Egypt. He had to make him swear. So Jacob obviously didn't do this because he didn't believe Joseph. He knew Joseph would keep his word, but Jacob was scared of Pharaoh. Jacob was scared that Pharaoh would want him buried in Egypt. Why? Because when Jacob came down to the land of Egypt, there was a famine. And the second he came to the land of Egypt, it ended. The hunger was over. Everyone had an abundance of food, and it was raining, and the water was rising. Why? Why did this happen? Because when Jacob came to Pharaoh for the first time, he blessed him that the water will rise to your feet. And we see this in last week's Torah portion, how Joseph introduces his father to Pharaoh. And his father blesses Pharaoh, the water will rise to your feet. And what happens when the water is spreading all over? Everything can plant, you can grow whatever you want, and that's it. The hunger's over. And Pharaoh is going to look 17 years down the line and see that Joseph wants to bury his father in Israel. Now, wait a second. Does that mean we're going back to the hunger years? Does that mean the water's not going to rise anymore? Because the person who brought the blessing down to the land of Egypt was Jacob. So therefore, Jacob made his son swear. Why? Why something so powerful? Because Jacob knew that on a swear, there's no way that Joseph was actually not going to listen to his word. He was going to do it no matter what. And therefore, we see the importance of the beginning of this week's Torah portion, how Jacob forces his son to swear. And we actually see it turns out to be good for him, because later in this week's Torah portion, Joseph goes over to Pharaoh and asks Pharaoh, "Dear Pharaoh, I would like to bury my father in Israel. Would you let me?" And Pharaoh hesitates. "Oh, maybe not. Why would you want to? Why don't you leave him here for a bit?" And they ask him to leave him there for 40 days and another 40 days. And then finally, Joseph goes over to Pharaoh and tells him, "Do you remember when you made me the viceroy?" And Pharaoh says, "Yeah." And Joseph says, "Do you remember what you tested me?" He says, "Yeah." What was the test? Pharaoh was the smartest man in the country. He was the greatest person of Egypt. Everyone looked up to Pharaoh. And one of the many things that Pharaoh knew was many languages. And he knew how to speak 70 languages. And when he met Joseph, he told Joseph, "Listen, the way it works in Egypt is the smartest man rules. So if you are actually the wisest man in the land, I'm going to have to test you." So he tested him in every single language. Pharaoh asked him a question. Joseph answered back in that language. And then they went through the 70 languages. And Joseph was like, "Can I test you on one language?" And he said, "Sure." So he asked him a question in Hebrew. And Pharaoh couldn't answer back. Pharaoh didn't know Hebrew. So Pharaoh made Joseph swear to him that he'll never reveal to the people of Egypt that he knows one more language than Pharaoh. And he said, "Yeah, I'll swear." So now Joseph was able to have leverage over Pharaoh. And he was able to go over to Pharaoh and said, "Look, I swore to my father I'm going to bury him in the land of Israel. If you don't want me to break my promise to my father, then I won't break my promise to you. But if you're going to make me break my promise to my father, I'm going to break my promise to you. And I'm going to tell the people of Egypt that you don't speak Hebrew." And therefore, when we look at the verses of the Torah later on in this week's Torah portion, we see how the interaction between Joseph and Pharaoh is a bit sour. And then as it goes along, Pharaoh just says, "Yes, you can bring him up." And Rashi explains this thing that we just spoke about, how Pharaoh originally didn't want to let him, but Joseph had the leverage because of the promise to Pharaoh that he made to Pharaoh, that he won't tell everyone that he's fluent in Hebrew and Pharaoh isn't. Moving on, as Jacob gets older, Joseph brings his two children. And we know what happens. Joseph brings his two children. He puts Ephraim on the left side of his father and Manasseh, the older son, on the right side. So like that, his father sitting on the bed should have his right hand on the older son, his left hand on the younger son. What does Jacob do? He switches his arms around and he puts his right hand on the younger son, Ephraim. And he puts his left hand on the weaker son. And then Joseph asks, "What are you doing, father?" And Jacob answers something that the commentaries explain, something really powerful. And we can see this throughout history in the different tribes between Manasseh and Ephraim, this story playing out. Jacob tells his son, yes, Menashe is going to be a great leader and he's going to have a great tribe, but Ephraim is going to be greater. And one thing that we really see it is when we think about the names of Menashe and Ephraim, we can actually understand why the younger son, Ephraim, was greater than the older son, Menashe. Menashe comes from the word Nishani Elokim. God stumbled me. I'm stuck. I don't know what I'm doing here. It's a sour name. Menashe comes from a very sour place, a very sad place inside Joseph's heart when he names his son Menashe. It comes from being in pain. When it comes to the name Ephraim, actually we see choice, we see growth. Ephraim comes from the name Ephraim. I'm fruitful. Even in the land of Egypt, I'm still fruitful. So therefore, Jacob placed his right hand over the head of Ephraim, even though he was the younger son, but he was the son that represented growth, even in time of despair, even in hardships, even in exile. And we actually see this in Jewish history, that from the tribe of Ephraim, we have more judges, more prophets, and more great people came from the tribe of Ephraim. For example, the leader after Moses, Joshua, was from the tribe of Ephraim. And from the tribe of Menashe, we also see some great leaders, but not as many as of the tribe of Ephraim. Because Ephraim, its name is about growth, about fruitfulness, about even in a hard time, we're moving forward. And we continue to grow no matter what. Now, continuing in this week's Torah portion, we have a very, very, very interesting discussion that happens. A one-verse talk. The Torah tells us one verse about this, but we really have to dive deep and try to understand what's going on in this verse. And this is back to what we originally started speaking about. Why can't Jews understand the future? Why do we have such a hard time looking and trying to see what's going to be? Why can't we see it? And we actually, the first person who tried to tell us the future was Jacob. Now, I'm just going to say the verse to look at. Chapter 49, the first verse of chapter 49, verse 1. Right? Yaakov called his sons and said, so Jacob called in his sons, says, gather around and I will tell you what will happen to you at the end of days. Wow. Jacob wanted to reveal to the Jewish people what will be. You should be cautious. The Persians are going to come. The Romans are going to come afterwards. And then the Germans. He wanted to warn us. He wanted to tell us. And he wanted to tell us when it's all going to be over. What happens? He doesn't say. And we look at verse 2. What did he actually start saying? He started blessing the children. He said, gather my sons around and I'm going to bless you. So what happened to verse 1? What happened to this talk that Jacob wanted to tell the Jewish people what will be in the future? Why did he conceal it from us? There's a really powerful story about the power of belief and trusting that's good will eventually happen. In the Holocaust, sorry that I can't remember the name off the back of my head. The author of Man's Search for Meaning wrote a story, a really powerful story. There was someone in his barrack, I think it was Viktor Franklin, right? Viktor Franklin wrote. Someone in his barrack who in 1944 or beginning of 1945 said, March 30th, we're going to be redeemed. And obviously we know the situation was terrible inside the barracks. There was disease, sickness, people were dying, people were running to the gate and killing themselves, or people were doing things that the Nazis would kill them. And it was a nightmare of a situation. But this person wakes up one morning and he's all excited. He's all happy. What happened? He had a dream. March 30th, we're going to be redeemed. The Americans are going to come, or the Russians are going to come, whoever it is. March 30th, we're going to be freed. We're going to be free people. We're not going to be in this camp anymore. And for the next few months, he's living with this joy and excitement in his heart that he's almost there. He's making it. Just a few more days, a few more months, a few more weeks. He's going to be there. March 30th, it's going to be all over. And as the day is coming closer, he slowly starts realizing that maybe that day won't happen. And his hopes start dropping. And his health comes along with it. And he gets sick. And the night of March 30th, he passed away. And we know, obviously, it wasn't March 30th. It was in mid-April. It was just another 2 weeks. If he would have survived another 2 weeks, he would have been a free man. But what was so powerful about this person? What was so special about this person? That for a few months of his life, the situation hasn't changed. He's been living in this awful camp where people are dying right and left. There's hunger, starvation, sickness. Everything was the same. But inside his heart, there was an excitement for a day. Something's going to be here. Something's going to come. Something's going to free me. And there's this hope in his mind. And obviously, when the day didn't come, it was really hard for him. And as the day came closer and closer and closer, until it was within the week, and he realized that he won't be freed on March 30th, he got sick and eventually passed away. Jacob wanted to tell the Jewish people what's going to be. He wanted to warn the Jewish people. He wanted to say in the Jewish year 5782, that's this Jewish year, the Jewish people are going to be freed from the exile and go into the ultimate redemption. Messiah is going to come and it's all going to be over. And if you look at the verse, that's what he said. I'm going to gather around and we'll tell you what happened at the end of days. When is the end of days? Mashiach, the time Messiah. And Rashi explains, why didn't he tell us? Why doesn't the verse tell us? It says God hid the secret from him. He had the secret in his mind. He knew the day in his mind, and God took it away from him. God said, no, this you can't share. And he goes on to explain, to bless the sons. What was so powerful about knowing the future? And we also want to understand what's the problem with knowing the future. So if we look in Jewish history, there are actually multiple rabbis who came up with different dates and said, this day on this year is a really special day, and Messiah can come in that day. And now it's called a ketz. A ketz means an end of a time. And throughout history, there's these different days that different rabbis said that is the end of time. Now, to truly understand what a ketz is, an end, how can a rabbi come and say at this year and this day, the world's going to come to an end, Messiah is going to be here? How does a rabbi could get up and say such a thing? Now, actually, if we look at Daniel actually was the first person to give an actual time when Messiah is going to come. The problem is, when we look at Daniel and we try to understand what he meant, we have a really hard time understanding which day, and different rabbis argue what exactly he meant. But we see in Jewish history this reoccurrence of people saying at this day, at this time, Messiah is going to come, and it's all going to be over. Now, how can a rabbi come and say such a thing? How can someone come and say, oh, this is it. It's all good. If we just wait till the 1st of January next year, we're good to go. So if we take it a step further, we can actually understand. When we open and learn a little bit about the time to come, about the time of Mashiach, the time of Messiah, we have two very conflicting ways how Messiah is going to come. In one place, it says Messiah is going to come on the shoulders of eagles, and we're going to be carried to Israel. And today's day, we could really understand it. He's going to fly in somehow. And on the other hand, we see it says he's going to come on a donkey. Now, from all the animals in the world that we use to travel, you can put in elephants, camels, horses. Donkeys are the slowest. They're the cheapest. They're not the most beautiful looking animal. They can't carry a big load. So what's going on? Why does one place tell us that he's going to come with all this glory? Messiah is going to come with all this glory. He's going to come on the wings of eagles, and everyone's going to be lifted up. And in the other, it says the extreme opposite. It's going to be a poor person riding on a donkey on the cheapest animal you could buy. How's that going to happen? How can both happen simultaneously? And obviously, they're both not going to happen simultaneously, because either you're on the donkey or you're on the eagle. Either you're a poor person or you're big or you're this king. So to truly understand this is a really, really interesting story brought down in the Talmud. There was a great scholar. His name was Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Joshua, the son of Levi. This scholar, he lived about 100 years after the destruction of the second temple. And he would learn with Elijah, the prophet. Elijah, the prophet, would come and learn with him. And he went on many journeys with him. And one day he was like, you know what? Let me ask Elijah. Elijah, do you know when Messiah is coming? Could you tell me the day? I'll keep it a secret. And Elijah says, why don't you go ask Messiah himself? So the scholar, Rabbi Yeshua, was like, oh my gosh, I can meet Messiah? I can meet him? It's like, yeah, let me tell you where to go and meet him. He says, go to this and this city and go to the outskirts of the city. And there's a place where all the poor people who are suffering with all these different sicknesses sit. And you're going to see something amazing. You're going to see that all the sick people, they take off all their bandages and everything they're covering themselves with. And then they clean it, and then they put it back on. So they take off their garb, all of them. One that's covering their neck, the one that's their shirt, they just take off everything at once. They clean it and they put it back on. But Messiah does one at a time. He first takes off the bandage that's on his arm, cleans it, he puts it back on. He takes off the one that's on his leg, cleans it, and puts it back on. He takes off one at a time and cleans it and puts it back on. But everyone else does it all at once. So Joshua asked Elijah, the scholar Joshua, not the prophet, asked him, why does Messiah not do what everyone else does? So he says, because if Messiah is summoned, and he said, okay, it's time to redeem the Jewish people, he has to be ready. So he doesn't have time to take off everything. He has to do one at a time. So like that, if he's summoned to bring the Messiah right away, he takes it off, puts it back on, and it's all good. He doesn't have to wait to put on everything because he only took off one. Everyone else takes off everything. So it takes a lot of time to put everything back on. But Messiah does one at a time. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the scholar who used to learn with Elijah, travels to the city, and he goes to the outskirts of the city, and he sees exactly what Elijah told him. Everyone, all these poor people are all doing exactly what Elijah said, and there's this one poor person that's different. It's like, oh my gosh, I see Messiah. How crazy. He goes over to Messiah, and he says, Messiah, when are you coming? When are you coming to redeem the Jewish people? So he told him today. So the scholar looks at Messiah like, oh my gosh, today it's going to be over. Today we're going to be redeemed. It's all done. He runs to the market. He buys tons of food. He gets himself a new garb. He invites all his friends over that are in town, and he makes a huge feast. He says, today I met Messiah, and he said today he's coming. Obviously, what happened? The day passes, the night came, and Messiah didn't come. And he's all devastated and sad. Messiah lied to me, or Elijah lied to me. I'm not sure who lied to me, but someone did. And he goes back to Elijah, and he asks him, why did you lie to me? Why did Messiah lie to me? Someone lied to me. So he told him something very, very powerful. Elijah tells the scholar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he told him, you missed a few words. You got so excited when you heard today the word that Messiah is coming today, you missed a few words. You missed if you listen to his voice. And obviously we know that means God's voice. If you listen to God's voice, he would come. But you just heard today, you just heard the word today and you got all excited, but you missed the rest of the phrase. Today, Messiah is coming today, if you listen to his voice. And this teaches us something very, very powerful about what Jacob was trying to tell his children and what God stopped him from doing. Jacob wanted to tell the people, like what Viktor Frankl wrote in his book, there's a day called March 30th where you're going to be redeemed. There's a day where it's all going to be over. And you could just look forward for that day. And when that day comes, it's all done. And God said, no, that's not how I run the world. Why? What did Messiah mean when he said today, if you listen to his voice? He meant to say like this, I'm ready to come today. The question is, are you ready for him to come? Are the Jewish people yearning for him to come? Are the Jewish people actually waiting for Messiah to come? And if they're all ready and willing to accept me, I'm going to reveal myself. The problem is, no one's there. You missed out. Maybe you're there, maybe someone else is there, but not everyone. And this is what God was trying to tell Jacob. Don't reveal my secret to the Jewish people. Yes, I want Messiah to come. And yes, it would be nice if the Jewish people knew. Imagine we're all Jewish. We're all scholars. We all want Messiah to come. We all want good to happen in this world. We want the world to change, right? We're all working for this common goal. And we're told, actually, you could sit down, you could go back to sleep, go on vacation, come back in 3 months from now, Messiah is going to be here in 3 months. No one would do anything, right? God doesn't want that from us. And God was telling Jacob, you can't reveal the date of Messiah. You know why? Because the Jewish people have to earn it from within themselves. Yes, there is a day that if the Jewish people don't earn it, God is going to bring it no matter what. And therefore, we see sometimes that the Torah tells us that Messiah is going to come like a donkey. But if the people earn it within themselves, that Messiah should be, becoming a Messiah would speed up, then we see that Messiah comes with the eagles. And then we see the personal call of each individual calling for Messiah. And that's what Messiah told the scholar, I'm coming today if you listen to his voice, if you listen to God's voice, and if you do what you're supposed to do as a good person in this world, I'm going to be here, because that's what the world is calling for. But we have to work towards that. And this is why God did not let Jacob reveal the date that Messiah was coming. So what did Jacob tell the children? Jacob decides to bless the children. And Jacob actually blesses the children with very, very powerful blessings. And we can learn many, many lessons from the blessings. And I'm just going to stop on a few of the children. First, we see that he calls them over and he starts off with the oldest son, Reuven. And he starts criticizing Reuven. For those who remember, 4 weeks ago, we learned in the Torah portion how Reuven, the oldest son of Jacob, after the passing of Rachel, pulled out his father's bed from Rachel's tent and brought it to his mother's tent. And Jacob obviously didn't like that. And this is what Reuven is being criticized for in the beginning of the blessings of the children. And then Levi and Yehuda, the next two children, Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi, the next two children. Instead of blessing them, what does their father Jacob do? He criticizes them as well. He says, you guys are warriors. You guys go out and kill a city and you're not scared. And he doesn't bless them with any blessing. You guys killed people. You guys were angry. And you're going to be spread out within the Jewish people. Like we know that the Levites didn't have an actual place in Israel. They had cities spread out all over. What type of blessing is this? And then we come to Judah. Finally, we see the first blessing that Jacob gives one of his children. And he says, you're going to be the king. From you, everyone's going to listen. And eventually, the kingship is going to become to Judah. Now, we really have to understand, why is Jacob so hard with his children right before he passed away. A little bit of, just it's the end of your time, Jacob. Why don't you bless your 3 oldest children? Why are you so hard? So there's a few explanations on what's going on over here. But one that could really actually understand, and Jacob was trying his best to actually tell the future to the Jewish people. He wasn't only trying to bless them. And when God didn't let him tell the date that when Messiah is going to come, he had to change it up. He had to bless them. But he had to bless them in such a way and explain their tribes to them. So they should know what to do. They should know with who to gather. And if we look closely within the blessings, even though they don't seem like blessings, to the 3 older sons, actually there's a lot of blessings there. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. Let's go through Reuven first, the oldest son, right? What does he call Reuven? You're my firstborn, you're my strength. But he doesn't give him the firstborn blessings. Actually, Joseph gets the firstborn blessings, like we're going to see soon. Joseph had 2 tribes come from him, coming from his descendants, and Reuven didn't. But what he was trying to tell Reuven, when he tells him that you've interfered with your father's bed, that he moved the bed from your father, and you will not be privileged. And in other words, he won't get the benefit of being the oldest son, and Joseph will be getting the oldest son. But he was also telling him like this. He was trying to teach the Jewish people that yes, sometimes you could lose out on things, and sometimes not everything, some mistakes that you do, you can't take back. But you know what? You're still, even though you lost the privilege of the priesthood, and you lost the privilege of the kingship, and you lost the privilege of being my firstborn son, but he still calls him my strength and my first drop. Why? Because after all, you're part of the Jewish people. So even after all that Reuven did and Reuven lost, in a way, before he passes on, Jacob is actually calling him Jacob is calling him with some love. He's telling him, yes, you've done so much of these things that made me push you away from being who you were really supposed to be. And you really ruined yourself. But you know what? You're still my firstborn, and you're still always going to be part of me. You're always going to be part of the Jewish people. And we see with Shivet Reuven in the desert caused some issues with Moses, and we could get to it in a different Torah portion. But they were still part of the Jewish people. Shimon and Levi were 2 brothers that were inseparable. They always did everything together. But when Jacob blesses them, he says, I'm going to separate you. And he separates the Levites so much that they're all spread out all over. But at the same time, he blesses them. Why? Because sometimes when you're spread out all over, you could reach out to anyone who's anywhere. And we see that the cities of the Levites were actually a place where people who had to be saved would go to. It was a city of good because the Levites couldn't own many land. They had to receive gifts from others. So people used to go to those cities. So because they were spread out, it gave the opportunity from the people from every single tribe and all over Israel to come to them and give them. And we see this throughout the blessings. Now, one more blessing that I want to sit on a little bit is the Shivet of Zlulun, the tribe of Zlulun. Now, what's very interesting about the tribe of Zlulun, the blessing is Zlulun will live by the seacoast, and he will be at the ship's ports doing business, and the end of his territory will be at Sidon. So Zlulun is blessed to be a businessman. His older brother, Yisachar, was blessed to be a scholar. Now the real question comes, why do we see that Jacob switched the order of the brothers? When we look at 3 weeks ago, if you looked at the Torah portion, which brother was older? We see that Yisachar was older than Zlulun. But we look at this week's Torah portion, Zlulun received the blessings before his older brother. Why did Jacob change the order of the blessings? He blessed the younger brother before the older brother. And we see the same thing in the last Torah portion of the Torah. When Moses blesses the Jewish tribes, he blesses the tribe of Zebulun before the tribe of Yisachar, even though Yisachar was the older brother. Now, if we actually have a deep look at what they were blessed, we can actually understand this. Zlulun was blessed to be a businessman, to go out to the world, to be someone who explores. He lives at the sea. Yisachar was blessed to be a scholar, to sit in the tents. It says the wise men of Jerusalem would come from the tribe of Yisachar. Now, if I ask any ordinary person, what's greater, to be a businessman or to be a scholar? To be a professor in the most prestigious university or to be the wealthiest man in life? Well, depends who you ask. Some people, for them, they look at money as more important. They look at the mundane value of what you own, your cars, what you drive, where you live. Others look at knowledge. They say, wow, this guy has a PhD he's a neuroscience or whatever he does. He's a much smarter person. He's one of the greatest scholars of our time. Which one is greater? And the Torah answers this question for us in these two verses. The tribe of Zlulun were businessmen. The tribe of Yisachar, who were the older brother, they were scholars. And the Torah tells us that the businessman is much greater than the scholar. You know why? The scholar, he sits in his home, in his office, in the library. He learns, he reads, and then he gives off. But he's always surrounded within his type of person. The people who come to his class are people who want to learn, who understand him. But when a professor gives over a lecture, most of the students there, if not all of them, want to become one day a professor in that specific field that he's giving a lecture in, right? And in everything that when it comes to knowledge, you give over to people who want to listen, people within your circle. But business is just the opposite. Business, the whole idea is spreading out. The whole idea is going out as much as you can. You want to expand your business overseas, another country, another state, a new client. It's always new. It's always innovating. You always have to learn what's going on in the world. And to be a good Jew and a businessman is way harder than to be a good Jew and a scholar. Because when you're a good Jew and a scholar, you're surrounded with your people. You know, everyone that's coming to you is talking to you about the same thing. But the way people who are in business think is just the opposite. They're always about going out, expanding their business, and they always have to meet new people, and they have to go out of themselves. And in a way, God wants us to do this in this world. What does he want us to do? He wants us to go out. He doesn't want us to stay in our comfort zone. He wants us to go out to the world. He wants us to meet new people, to do good with strangers, to do good with your friends, to do things that you never thought are possible, but to try to put yourself out there on display. And therefore, we see that even though Zlulun, the tribe of Zlulun, is actually the younger brother, but he's blessed first. Because what he could do in this world is much greater than anyone else. What he could do in this world is go out to everyone. His older brother Yisachar, yes, he's older, is blessed afterwards. Why is he blessed second? Because he's just a scholar. He stays in a small little circle. And God is trying to tell us, and Jacob is trying to tell us in the Torah, that going out to the world is more important than staying in your little bubble. And therefore, we see that the younger brother was actually blessed before the older brother. Now, moving along to the blessings, there's many interesting blessings, like the Shivet of Dan is called a snake. And there's so many things that we could sit on, but we're going to move on a little bit further. One burning question when we read this week's Torah portion is when Yaakov asks his son Joseph to bury him in the double cave where all the patriarchs and the matriarchs are buried, Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and who does he ask to bury him there? From all his children. He has 12 children in Egypt, hundreds of grandchildren. He asks Joseph to bury him. Why? Because Joseph's the viceroy. Why not? Ask the most powerful person, right? But when you think about it, where's Joseph's mother buried? She's buried on the side of the road. If we read the description of the Torah of where Rachel is buried, Joseph's mother, if we look at chapter 48, verse 7, when I was coming from Padan, Rachel died of me while traveling through the land of Canaan, when there was still about a half-mile stretch of land to reach Ephrat. And you're upset that I buried her there on the way to Ephrat in Bethlehem. So where's Rachel buried? On the way, on the road. Jacob couldn't walk another half a mile to bury her, at least in a city. She's buried on the road in the middle of nowhere. Where's everyone else buried? Abraham is buried with the first person, Adam. And Isaac is buried with his father and his wife. And Jacob, where does he ask to be buried? He says, I want to be buried with my parents. I want to be buried with my wife, Leah. I want to be buried in the double cave, Marata Machpelah, where the patriarchs and the matriarchs are all buried, besides one. But how does he ask such a thing from Rachel, from Joseph, Rachel's son, who he buried on the side of the road? He couldn't take some time out of his busy day to bring her body to the double cave where he wants to be buried. He leaves her on the side of the road. What's going on over here? How is it possible for Jacob to ask such a thing from his son when he buried his mother on the side of the road? So now when we actually look into this, there's many different approaches that scholars throughout the generations try to answer this question. But I'm just going to focus on one. The way Rashi explains it's actually really powerful. Rashi tells us that usually when you're trying to ask something from someone, but you did just the opposite from someone else, you're going to have to give a good reason for why you did the opposite to someone else. Jacob is asking Joseph to bury him in the cave with his parents, but he did the opposite to his wife. Joseph's mother, Rachel, left him on the side of the road. And Jacob tells Joseph, you should know when the Jewish people are going to be in the most despair time, they're going to be in chains. They're going to be traveling in exile from Jerusalem to Babylonia. You know where they're going to stop? You know who they're going to cry out to? They're not going to be able to go to the cave of the patriarchs. They won't make it there. But they're going to be able to make it to your mother. Your mother is the most powerful woman from everyone. And therefore, I was told to bury her on the side of the road. I was told to leave her there. You know why? Because when someone's left on the side of the road, they can understand when someone else is left on the side of the road. When someone's been through something so tough, they can understand when someone's in that situation. Rachel was left on the side of the road. So when the Jewish people are left on the side as well, when they're being exiled out of their country, it says, Rachel mevachel al banea. Rachel is crying on her children. What happened to Abraham? What happened to Isaac? Jacob? Where's everyone else? No one else is crying. The Jews are in exile. No one else is crying. The answer is Rachel wanted to be buried on the side. Rachel cared about her children so much. She wanted to be buried on the side. And we see this special love between Rachel and Joseph a few times in the verses in a few weeks ago, and in last week's verse, and this week's verse, in this week's chapter, in this week's portion, we see how Rachel and Joseph had this extreme bond, and Rachel really, really loves her children, gives everything up for her children. She passes away for a child, but when Joseph and Rachel were about to see Jacob's brother Esau a few weeks ago, Joseph stands in front of her mother. Joseph protects her mother. And we see this a few times. And Rachel was the loved one, but Rachel really, really cared about her children more than anything else. And therefore, you know who was granted to continue the Jewish nation throughout the generations? It wasn't the fathers. It wasn't the patriarchs. It was the matriarchs. It was Rachel. It was Rachel that was left on the side. And it's therefore told this very day what decides who is a Jew and who is not. It's based on your mother, because the mothers are the one who cry for their children, who care about their children, who go out and give for their children no matter what. And Rachel was willing and sacrificed from being buried with all the glory, with all the other patriarchs and matriarchs. So like that, she should be able to be there for her children many, many generations later when they're in a time of despair. Now we go on to Yaakov passing away. Jacob passes away. And the Egyptians cry over him for 40 days. And Joseph goes to Pharaoh and asks him, can you please let me bury my father in Israel? Eventually grants him permission, like we spoke about it. And his sons carried him to the land of Canaan to bury him in the double cave. Now, something very interesting, if we look at the verse, Rashi explains us that actually only 10 of his sons carried Jacob. 2 sons didn't carry Jacob. Which 2 sons? Joseph, because he was a king, and a king doesn't carry someone who passes away. And Levi, because his descendants are going to be holy. So to show to his holiness, he didn't carry his father. Now, who did they put instead? They put in Joseph's 2 children. They put in Manasseh and Ephraim instead. And why did they put them 2 instead of Joseph and Levi? To show us that Joseph was the one who received the blessings of the firstborn from his father, and he's going to have 2 tribes. And they wanted to show it in such a way that when they were burying their father Jacob, there were 10 children of Jacob and 2 grandchildren of Jacob. But those 2 grandchildren forever are going to be counted as part of the children, because Joseph was the firstborn. And therefore, it's so important in the story when we see that Jacob's grandchildren, Manasseh and Ephraim, carried him alongside all the other sons. Interesting enough, the Medrash tells us about a very interesting story that happened when they finally reached the land of Israel. As they're going along from Egypt all the way to Hebron, the cave of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, Esau showed up, Jacob's brother, and he had a fight to pose. He said, listen, Jacob already buried his wife, Leah, inside the cave. Now there's one more spot in the cave. The cave belonged to our parents. Why does Jacob get the second spot? I should get the second spot of the cave. And first thing, the sons were like, wait a second. You sold the rights of the firstborn to your brother Jacob, so therefore he gets both spots. And his brother Esau said, no, I never sold it. Lies, prove it. He said, there's a contract. You signed the contract to your brother. And Esau said, no, I never signed the contract. Where's the contract? Show me. So they were looking for the contract, and they realized they left it in Egypt. So they sent one of the brothers to go quickly down to Egypt and get the contract. And as they were waiting there, Dan, one of the brothers, whose name was Dan, had a son who was deaf. He was mute. He didn't understand. He didn't see. And the only thing he saw was that his grandfather is laying there on the side of the road waiting to be brought into the cave. And his grandfather's brother is holding him up. So he went, he took a sword, and he killed his grandfather's brother. And he killed his grandfather's brother, who was stopping him from burying his grandfather. And then they buried Jacob. And now when we think about the story is actually hinted out to us in the verse many, many weeks ago, when Rebekah cries to Isaac and says, please send Jacob away from here before his brother kills him. Why should I have both of them die on me in one day? So many, many years ago, Rebekah, who many years has passed since that day happened, has a prophecy that both of her children are going to die on the same day. And yet they didn't die on the same day, but they were both buried on the same day. And this is something that's hinted out to us in this week's Torah portion, but continuing, Jacob passes away. Joseph and his brother comes down back, and his brothers come back down to Egypt. And his brothers are worried. His brothers don't know what's going to be now. Jacob passed away. Till now, Joseph respected all the brothers and took care for them. Since The father was still alive. Joseph had tremendous respect for his father. But now that Jacob isn't alive anymore, is he going to take revenge? Is he going to get back at his brothers for selling him many, many years ago? But we actually see something very powerful. Joseph says, no, I'm not going to do that to you. Hatachat Elokimani. Am I instead of God? Am I instead of God? Am I the one who's supposed to take revenge for something that I didn't do? Look at what God gave me since I'm here. And Chassidus actually explains something really, really powerful that we can learn from this. If we look at the deeper meaning. Joseph was someone who, no matter where he went, he was successful. He went down to Egypt, he succeeded. He went down, he became the viceroy, he succeeded. He was in prison, he was successful. He was the head of the prison. Everywhere we went in life, he was successful. And therefore, Joseph has this title, Joseph the Righteous. No matter where he went, he was righteous. Why? No one else has that title. Abraham is not called Abraham the Righteous. He's called Abraham our father. Joseph's only one in that era of the Jewish people that we call him tzaddik, righteous. So if you have a field of oak trees, and you look at any oak tree, is anyone more greater or more special than the other? Maybe relatively a few inches, a little higher, a little wider. But if you have a palm tree in the middle of the desert with no water around, nothing near it, just sand all over, that is a special sight. That is something to see. Joseph was like this palm tree in the desert. No matter where he went, he was successful. No matter where he went, he strived. His brothers weren't like that. So his brothers were scared after Jacob passed away that now Joseph is going to force them to be like him spiritually. Joseph spiritually can handle the world. He can handle the outside world. He can be the viceroy and still stay a righteous Jew. But the brothers couldn't handle it. And the brothers were scared he will get back at them. He would make them spiritually serve God in a way that they won't be able to handle. And Joseph answers back to them, no, I am not in the place of God. And the brothers, we see that even after the father passed away, and also before the father passed away, they were shepherds. What's so special about being a shepherd? You're secluded. You're to yourself. You don't deal with the world. You just have your flock of sheep and you're good. That's what the brothers wanted. They just wanted to live a spiritual life. They just wanted to be with God. And this is where, in this week's Torah portion, we really see the difference between Jacob and his brother, and Joseph and his brothers. His brothers were worried that Joseph was going to force upon them, this way how to serve God that they won't be able to handle. And Joseph says, no, I'm not in the place of God. I don't decide how you serve God. And we could take this lesson in our lives. Some people, the way they serve God is they come to synagogue once a week. Some people, they come to synagogue every day. Some people, more traditional. Some people, they love God. They fear God. There's different ways how we interact with God. And Joseph was telling his brothers, I'm not in the place of God. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to be the one to tell you how to serve. You have to serve the way you feel your soul is right. And for the brothers, it was to stay shepherds. It was to stay out in the fields. It was to stay secluded. One last short, very, very interesting thought on this week's Torah portion is that the Torah ends off the book of Genesis with the following verse. And after this verse, we all scream out in synagogue, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. What's the verse? The last verse of this week's Torah portion, chapter 50, verse number 26. Joseph died at the age of 110 years. They embalmed him, and he was placed into a coffin in Egypt. And after we say the words, he was placed into a coffin in Egypt, we all scream, be strong, and may we be strengthened. Let's think about that for a second. We all going to scream, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. We should be strong, and maybe we be strengthened. On what? He was placed into a coffin in Egypt. On those words, we're screaming, Chazak. Yeah, we should go to Egypt. We We should be in coffins in Egypt. That's what we're saying, be strong. So the Rabbi actually explains that in every time of despair, within that time, there's already a way out. Within the time itself, while we're suffering, there's a way out. And therefore, Joseph being placed in a coffin in Egypt is so powerful. And we end off with this, be strong. Because before the Jews go into exile, they need hope. They need something that's going to take them. They need someone to go to. They need something that's going to promise them that they're going to be taken out. And that's Joseph. Joseph is stuck in Egypt with the Jewish people. And in every single generation, while we were in exile, the Redeemer was within us. And in more particular, within ourselves. There's a coffin of Joseph within ourselves. There's a spark within ourselves. There's good. Even in the most time, in the time of the most despair, while we're suffering and everything is going wrong, God tells the end of the book of Genesis, and he was placed into a coffin in Egypt. We could look at it and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Or we could say, wow, even in the hardest times, we still have Joseph with us. And where is he? He's in a coffin. A coffin is buried. A coffin's in the ground. It's a little harder to reveal it. But Joseph was still with us. Our love to God is still with us. And this is what carried the Jewish people strong through the time of exile. And therefore, we say in this verse, be strong, and may we be strengthened. Thank you all for coming. May you all have a blessed day. And we'll see you all in synagogue very soon. All the best.